Hello, friends. We are very interested to know which cities you are listening to us from. So quickly like and write in the comments where you are from. Also share what shocking stories happened in your city or maybe even with you personally. Subscribe because the next story could be about your city or even your personal drama. Now let's dive into a new exciting story. Ethan Reynolds turned the wheel of his old black Ford F-150 pickup as he pulled out of the parking lot of the Harrington and Sons Construction Company. It was Friday, and the sun was already setting on the horizon, painting the suburbs of Richmond, Virginia, in soft orange tones. The spring air rushed in through the slightly open window, carrying with it the smell of freshly cut grass and damp earth, the same smell that he had loved since childhood, when his father would make him mow the lawn in front of their small house in the village. He had just turned 42, but today he felt older, the fatigue of the last few weeks weighing on his shoulders like the concrete slabs he was designing for the new James River Bridge. The drive home took exactly 22 minutes if you didn't get caught in traffic on Route 64. Ethan knew this for sure. He had been timing himself since the days when he first got a job as an engineer 12 years ago. Then he was full of energy, making plans, dreaming about how one day he would head a department and maybe open his own company. Now he just wanted to get home, take off his dust-soaked shirt, and drink a cold beer while sitting in the backyard. But something told him that the evening would not be as calm as he had hoped. He glanced at the passenger seat, where his battered leather bag lay. Sticking out of his side pocket was the corner of a faded photograph he had carried with him since he returned from the army. It was of him and Sophia Adams, his wife, then just a girl with long blonde hair and a smile that took his breath away. They stood on a pier at Lake Tahoe, holding each other, their first vacation together since he proposed to her. This was 17 years ago. Now her hair was shorter, her smile less frequent, and her hugs more of a habit than an impulse. Ethan frowned and turned to the road. Why did he even remember this now? The house on the hill greeted him with the familiar squeak of gravel under the tires. It was a two-story cottage with white walls and dark green shutters, which he inherited from his parents and rebuilt with his own hands. Once upon a time his mother and father lived here, then he himself, and then Sophia moved here with their children Emily and Mason. Ethan parked next to a silver Honda CR-V Sophia, turned off the engine, and just sat there for a few seconds, looking at the house. The light in the kitchen was on, and the faint clink of dishes could be heard from the window. She's at home. The children probably did too. Their bicycles were lying on the porch, as always. He got out of the car, slamming the door a little louder than necessary, and headed towards the entrance. The keys jingled in his hand as he unlocked the door. The inside smelled of roasted garlic and something else, maybe the spaghetti Sophia cooked on Fridays. He kicked off his shoes at the door, threw his bag on the hook, and walked through the living room, where 14-year-old Emily sat on the sofa, buried in her tablet. Her dark hair, inherited from him, fell in her face, and her headphones drowned out the world around her. "Hey, Em," he said, trying to sound cheerful. She looked up, pulled out one earbud, and muttered, "Hi, Dad." Her voice was even, almost indifferent. Teenagers, Ethan thought. Once upon a time, she would rush to him with hugs as soon as he crossed the threshold. "Where's Mason?" he asked, looking around. "Upstairs, playing her stupid game," Emily replied, staring at the screen again. Ethan nodded and went further into the kitchen. Sophia stood there, bending over the stove. She was wearing her usual home outfit, jeans and a white t-shirt, over which she threw an old apron with faded daisies. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a messy bun, with a few strands falling out and touching her neck. She looked, as usual, but something was wrong. Ethan noticed this immediately. Her movements were sharp, almost nervous, and the phone, lying on the table nearby, suddenly blinked on the screen. She immediately grabbed it and put it in her jeans pocket, without even looking at her husband. "You're early," she said without turning around. Her voice was slightly higher than usual, as if she was trying to hide her tension. "Yes, finished the drawings ahead of schedule," Ethan replied, leaning against the doorframe. He looked at her, trying to understand what had changed. Maybe it was the way she held her shoulders too tense, or how quickly she hid the phone. "What's for dinner?" "Spaghetti with meat sauce," she said, stirring something in the pan. "Your favorites." He nodded, although his throat was suddenly dry. Favorites. She used to cook this dish with a smile, making fun of how he always asked for more. Now it was just a ritual, another mark on their schedule. Ethan went to the refrigerator, took out a bottle of beer, and opened it with a quiet hiss. The cold metal pleasantly burned my fingers, and the first sip calmed my nerves a little. "How was your day?" he asked, more out of habit than interest. "Fine," Sophia replied, giving him a quick glance. "I closed a deal with a clinic in the north of the city. They took 2 ultrasound machines. What about you?" "I've finished the bridge project. Check tomorrow, but I think everything is clean," he said, taking another sip. He expected her to ask for details. She had always been interested in his work before, even if she didn't understand all the technical terms. But she simply nodded and turned to the stove. Ethan put the bottle on the table and suddenly noticed how her hand trembled as she took the plates out of the cabinet. It was subtle, but he knew her too well. 15 years of marriage teach you to read such little things. Trembling fingers, looking too quickly to the side, a slight curl of the lips that was not a smile. Something was wrong. And this wrong has been hanging in the air for weeks, maybe months. He just didn't want to notice. "Are you okay?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. Sophia froze for a second, then turned around with a forced smile. "Yes, of course. Just tired. Long week." He nodded, but something sank inside. Tired. This has been her standard excuse lately. Tired of work. Tired of children. Tired of him? Ethan pushed the thought away. Dinner passed in the usual silence, broken only by the clinking of forks and occasional remarks. Mason came downstairs, his blonde hair disheveled and his eyes sparkling from yet another victory in a video game. He was 10 and still that kid who enjoyed the little things, like an extra helping of gravy or a story about his dad building bridges. Emily ate in silence, not looking up from her tablet, until Ethan told her to put it away. She rolled her eyes but complied. Sophia sat opposite, picking at her food. Her phone lay nearby, face down, and Ethan noticed how she glanced at him a couple of times, as if she was waiting for something, or someone. He gripped the fork tighter than necessary and felt the metal dig into his palm. After dinner, the children went to their rooms, and Ethan helped clear the table. This was their routine. He washed the dishes, she did the drying. But today she seemed distracted, every now and then glancing towards the living room, where her bag lay. When he finished the last plate, she muttered something about checking her mail and left the kitchen. Ethan wiped his hands with a towel and listened. Silence. Then the faint sound of footsteps and the rustle of fabric. He looked out into the hallway and saw her take her phone out of her bag, quickly type something and put it back. My heart hit my ribs. He wasn't paranoid. He was not the kind of husband who spied on his wives, rummaged through their things, or demanded passwords. But this was too much. Ethan returned to the kitchen, sat down at the table, and stared at his bottle of beer. Half of it was left, but I didn't want to drink anymore. Instead, he remembered how it all began. They met in 2007, when he was 25 and she was 23. He had just returned from the army, full of ambition and the desire to live a normal life. Sophia worked in a cafe near the base. She served coffee and pies with such a smile that he returned there every day. She was bright, witty, with a slight sarcasm that caught him. 3 months later, he proposed to her right in that cafe, getting down on one knee in the middle of the hall. She laughed, said yes, and everyone around her applauded. Then he thought it was forever. The first years were good. They bought this house when it was still a dilapidated cottage, and together they renovated it. Ethan remembered how they painted the walls in the living room, how Sophia got paint on his nose, and he hugged her in retaliation, leaving white prints on her t-shirt. They laughed until they cried, and then they loved each other right on the floor, among cans of paint and old newspapers. Then Emily was born, and life became more difficult, but it still seemed right. Mason arrived 4 years later, and although money was sometimes tight, they managed. Sophia quit her job at the cafe, trained as a sales manager, and Ethan got a job at Harrington and Sons. They built a family, brick by brick. But somewhere along the way something broke. Maybe after Mason started kindergarten and Sophia started working full-time. Maybe when he started taking overtime to cover his mortgage and bills. Or when they stopped talking about anything other than children and everyday life. Ethan couldn't say exactly when the smile became less frequent and his patience became shorter. But he knew that the last 6 months had been the worst. She moved away. He felt it, but chalked it up to fatigue, her career, and his nerves. Now he realized that he was wrong. Ethan stood up, went to the window, and looked out into the backyard. There was an old oak tree there that he planted when Emily was born. Its branches swayed in the wind, and under it lay the bench where he and Sophia once sat in the evenings, planning the future. He would like to return there, to those conversations, to that closeness. But instead he saw only her back, her quick fingers on the phone screen, her evasive answers. The door to the living room creaked and Sophia returned to the kitchen. She looked at him, as if surprised that he was still here. "I'll go to bed early," she said, avoiding his gaze. "Meeting with a client in the morning." "Okay," he replied, although there was nothing good about it. She left, and he remained standing by the window, clutching an empty bottle. The morning in the house on the hill began as always with the hum of the coffee machine and weak light breaking through the curtains. Ethan woke up at 6:15 before his alarm and lay in bed, looking at the ceiling. The right side of the bed was empty. Sophia had already gotten up, or maybe she didn't lie down next to her at all. He didn't remember when she came upstairs last night because he had fallen asleep in the garage, sitting next to his motorcycle. He woke up from the cold somewhere after midnight, moved into the bedroom and collapsed on top of the blanket without even undressing. Now his neck ached and his shirt smelled of dust and machine oil. He turned his head towards her pillow. The mark of the head was barely visible, as if she had slept carefully so as not to leave marks. Ethan frowned. She once loved to crawl under the covers on his side, snuggle up to him, and fall asleep with her hand on his chest. He remembered how her hair tickled his chin, how she whispered something funny before going to bed. Now their bed was just a place where they slept each in their own half, separated by an invisible wall. The sound of footsteps came from below. Ethan sat down, rubbed his face with his hands, and stood up. His joints cracked. Years in the army and work in construction took their toll. He pulled on a clean t-shirt from his dresser drawer, walked down the stairs, and stood at the entrance to the kitchen. Sophia stood at the sink, pouring water into the coffee pot. Her movements were mechanical, like a robot on a factory line. She was wearing the same apron with daisies, and the phone lay on the tabletop nearby, screen down, like a sentry on duty. "Good morning," he said, trying to sound neutral. She shuddered, nearly dropping the coffee pot, and turned around. "Oh, you're already up. Good." Her voice was taut, like a string ready to snap. Ethan noticed dark circles under her eyes. Makeup did not hide them. She looked tired, but not as tired as after a day of work. It was a different type of fatigue, the kind that comes from secrets you've carried around for too long. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, going to the refrigerator. He pulled out a bottle of milk, more to keep his hands busy than out of hunger. "Yes, a little," she replied, turning to the coffee pot. "I was thinking about a meeting. I need to prepare a presentation." Ethan nodded, although her words sounded like memorized text. She was always good at sales. She knew how to convince anyone that her product was the best, even if it was a cheap coffee maker or an ultrasound machine for $100,000. Maybe she convinced him that way once that their marriage was worth believing in. He opened his mouth to ask about the presentation, but decided against it. Instead, he said, "I'll wake up the kids." "Okay," she said over her shoulder, without even looking at him. Ethan went upstairs and knocked on the door of Mason's room. "Rise up, champion. School is calling." From behind the door came a sleepy grumble, then the rustle of a blanket. "5 minutes, Dad." "3," Ethan grinned, but his smile quickly faded. He moved to Emily's room and knocked louder. Get up. Bus in half an hour." I'm not sleeping, she shouted, although her voice was hoarse from sleep. Ethan shook his head and went back down. The children were the only thing that still held this house together, and even they seemed to feel how everything was coming apart at the seams. When he returned to the kitchen, Sophia was already pouring coffee into her thermal mug. She glanced quickly at the phone and her fingers hovered over the button. The screen flickered, but she immediately turned it over again. Ethan felt the blood pounding in his temples. This was no longer just a suspicion, it was a signal, a red flag that he had ignored for too long. "Who's calling?" he asked, trying to keep his voice even. "What?" She looked at him, eyes wide. "Nobody. Just a reminder." Reminder at 6 in the morning, he squinted, taking a step closer. Sophia pursed her lips, then exhaled. "Yes, from a client. They want to clarify details before the meeting. You know how it is." "I know," he said, although he didn't know. His work was clear drawings, calculations, deadlines. No cryptic messages at 6 in the morning. He looked at her, trying to catch her eye, but she had already turned away, screwing the lid on the mug. "I need to shower," she said, grabbing her phone and heading towards the stairs. "Show the kids off, okay?" "As always," he replied, but she had already left. Ethan stood in the middle of the kitchen, listening to her footsteps fade upstairs. Then there was the sound of the bathroom door closing and the sound of running water. He looked at the empty table where her phone had just been lying and felt something click inside. Enough. He should know. Ethan waited until the sound of the water became steady and quietly climbed the stairs. The door to their bedroom was slightly open. He went inside, looking around. Her bag was lying on a chair next to the bed, the same one that she had been fiddling with in the living room yesterday. The phone was not in the bag. Ethan went to the chest of drawers where her cosmetic bag stood, but there was nothing there either. Then he heard a faint sound, a vibration muffled by the fabric. The sound came from under her pillow. He froze. His heart was beating so loudly that he could barely hear the running water from the bathroom. Ethan slowly reached out, pushed the pillow aside, and saw her iPhone screen up. The screen lit up with movement, a missed message. Sender name, Ryanum. The text was short. "See you at 8, don't be late." Ethan stared at the screen, feeling the floor disappear from under his feet. Ryanum. He didn't know any Ryan. Colleague? Client? Anyone else? His fingers trembled as he swiped the screen to unlock the phone. Password. Of course she changed it. Previously, these were the numbers of their anniversaries: 0715, the day he proposed to her. He introduced them. Wrong. I tried Emily's birthday's 0310. Incorrect. Mason's birthday's 0914. Passed again. Ethan cursed to himself and put the phone back, but the screen blinked again. New message. Are you in the shower? Text me when you get out. He stepped back as if the phone might bite him. Shower. She's in the shower, and someone this Ryan knows about it. Knows that she is at home, that she is getting ready for the day. Knows more than himself. Ethan clenched his fists, trying to breathe evenly. His brain was working at full capacity. He remembered every late evening at work, every meeting with clients, every time she hit her phone. How long does it last? Months? Years? He heard the water stop in the bathroom and quickly left the bedroom, closing the door. Going downstairs, he went into the kitchen, poured himself some coffee, and sat down at the table, staring into his mug. Thoughts were spinning like gears in a broken mechanism. He didn't want to believe it. He didn't want to think that Sophia, his Sophia, could do this to him. But the facts were in front of him, and he could not deny them. The children came downstairs a few minutes later. Mason was rubbing his eyes. His dinosaur pajamas were wrinkled. Emily looked a little more lively, but still frowned as she pulled on her backpack. "Where is Mom?" Mason asked, sitting down at the table. "In the shower," Ethan answered, placing a bowl of cereal in front of him. "I'll take you today." "What about the bus?" Emily was surprised, looking at him over the phone. "We'll let him through. I want to take you," he said, although it was a lie. He just needed to get out of the house, clear his head before he did something he regretted. Sophia came down when they were finishing breakfast. She was in a business suit, a dark blue jacket and trousers. Her hair was done, her makeup was impeccable. Her phone was in her hand, and she quickly put it in her bag, noticing Ethan's gaze. "I'm off," she said, kissing the top of Mason's head and giving Emily a quick, "Good luck at school." She barely looked at Ethan. "See you in the evening." "Good luck with the presentation," he said, his voice sounding colder than he intended. She nodded and left, slamming the door. Ethan watched her through the window. Hero Honda pulled out of the driveway and disappeared around the bend. He turned to the children. "Get ready. It's time." The road to school was silent. Mason chatted about his game, but Ethan answered in monosyllables. Emily sat in the back with her headphones on. He dropped them off at the gate. Mason ran to his friends, and Emily said a short bye and left. Ethan stayed in the car, looking at the empty schoolyard. His hands were everything. They were still squeezing the steering wheel, although the engine had already stalled. He didn't go to work right away. Instead, he turned towards the river, parked near the bank, and got out. The water flowed slowly, reflecting the gray sky. Ethan took out the same photograph from his pocket. Sophia, Lake Tahoe. He looked at her for a long time until his fingers began to tremble. Then he crumpled the photograph and threw it into the river. The paper floated, spinning in a whirlpool, until it was out of sight. He knew what he had to do. He'll ask her tonight, directly. No hints, no games. And if she lied, and he was sure she would, he would leave, because he could no longer live with this shadow. Ethan spent the day on autopilot. After he dropped Emily and Mason off at school and threw the photo into the river, he drove to the Harrington and Sons office. Work was supposed to distract him. The bridge drawings were awaiting final inspection, and he promised his boss to finish everything by Monday. But instead of focusing on the lines and numbers, he replayed the morning scene over and over in his head. Sophia's phone under the pillow, messages from Ryan M., her forced smile. His fingers gripped the pencil so tightly that it broke in half around lunchtime. Colleagues noticed his gloom, but no one asked. Ethan was not one to share personal things, and they were not one to pry into other people's affairs. By 5 o'clock, he gave up. The drawings were 3/4 complete, but his mind was too busy to complete them. He threw the folder on the table, grabbed his bag, and walked out, muttering something about family matters to his partner Tyler Bennett. Tyler, a lanky guy with perpetually messy bangs, just nodded and went back to his coffee. Ethan got into the pickup truck, started the engine, and drove home. The road was painfully familiar. Every turn, every traffic light, every billboard. But today everything seemed alien, as if he was driving through the scenery of someone else's life. When he arrived at the house on the hill, the sun was already setting, turning the sky crimson and gold. Honda Sophia was parked in the driveway, which meant she was home. Ethan parked nearby, turned off the engine, and just sat for a few seconds, looking at the white walls of the cottage. The light in the kitchen was on, just like last night, and he knew she was there, preparing dinner, pretending that everything was fine. His stomach clenched. He didn't want to come in. I didn't want to see her face, hear her voice, or pretend that nothing had changed. But the children were inside, and for their sake, he had to wear a mask. He got out of the car, slamming the door, and headed towards the entrance. The keys jingled in his hand as he unlocked the door. The inside smelled of garlic and tomato sauce, the same smell as yesterday, only today it seemed sharper, almost suffocating. Ethan kicked off his shoes at the threshold, threw his bag on the hook, and walked into the living room. Emily sat on the sofa, buried in her tablet, just like yesterday. Her headphones hung around her neck, and some bright pictures flashed on the screen, probably another video about makeup or dancing, which she was fond of. "Hey, Em," he said, trying to sound normal. She looked up and nodded. "Hey, Dad. You're late." "Yes, I was late at work," he lied, although he left earlier than usual. "Where is Mason?" "Upstairs, as always," she replied, returning to her screen. Ethan nodded and went further into the kitchen. Sophia stood at the stove, stirring the sauce in the pan. She was wearing jeans and the same white t-shirt as yesterday, only the apron had been replaced with another one, blue, with embroidered clouds. Her blonde hair was down, and she tucked it behind her ear in a quick movement, not noticing him in the doorway. The phone lay on the table nearby, face down, like a sentry guarding her secrets. Ethan leaned against the frame, arms crossed, and simply watched. She looked ordinary, like a wife, like a mother, like a woman he knew for 15 years. But now he saw cracks in this picture in her too fast movements, in the way she avoided his gaze. "You're home," she said, finally noticing him. Her voice was smooth, but there was a hint of tension in it. "Yes," he answered without moving. "It took a long time to drive. There was a traffic jam." She nodded, stirring the sauce. "Dinner is almost ready. Spaghetti, like yesterday. There's a lot left, so I decided not to throw it away." "Okay," he said, although he had no appetite. He went to the refrigerator, took out a bottle of beer, and opened it. The cold metal burned my fingers, and the hiss of the cork was the only sound in the silence of the kitchen. Sophia glanced at him briefly, but said nothing. She was always silent when he grabbed a beer after work. Previously, she could joke, "Are you drowning in stress again, soldier?" And he laughed. Now it was just part of their routine. Ethan took a sip and sat down at the table, watching her. Her movements were refined, almost mechanical. She cut the bread, laid out the plates, took out napkins. Everything looked so natural, so right, but he knew it was a mask. He saw the real her in the morning, the one who hid the phone, the one who received messages from Ryan M. And this thought burned him from the inside like a hot coal. "How's your day?" he asked, more out of habit than out of desire to know. "Fine," she answered without turning around. "The meeting went well. The clinic signed a contract. What about you?" "Drawings," he said briefly. "Passed for inspection." She nodded and silence fell between them again. Ethan looked at her back, at the way she was slightly hunched over the stove. He remembered how once, about 10 years ago, she had burned her hand while cooking dinner, and he had blown on her fingers while she had laughed and called him her personal doctor. Then he felt needed. Now he felt like a stranger. "Call the kids," she said, turning off the stove. "It's time to eat." Ethan stood up, walked into the living room, and shouted upstairs, "Mason, come down. Dinner," Emily sighed, putting the tablet away, and a minute later Mason's footsteps stomped down the stairs. His blonde hair was disheveled, and his Avengers t-shirt was wrinkled. "Spaghetti again?" he asked, sitting down at the table. "Don't grumble," Sophia said, placing the plate in front of him. "Eat what they give you." Mason shrugged and began to twist the pasta on his fork. Emily sat down opposite, silently taking the bread. Ethan looked at them, at their faces, so familiar and so distant. They were the only thing that still connected him with Sophia, and even that seemed fragile. He picked up his fork, but the food seemed tasteless, as if his senses had become dull. Dinner dragged on slowly. Mason was chatting about his game, something about a new level and a boss he defeated. Emily would occasionally throw in sarcastic comments like, "Nobody cares, Mace." Sophia smiled at them, but her smile was forced, like a plastic mask. Ethan was silent, picking at his food. He noticed how her hand twitched a couple of times towards the phone lying next to her, but she restrained herself. Each such gesture was like a knife in his chest. When the plates were empty, the children ran away, Mason upstairs, Emily to her tablet. Ethan stayed with Sophia in the kitchen. He began to wash the dishes, as always, and she took a towel to dry. It was their routine, their dance, rehearsed over the years. But today it felt fake, like a cheap show. "You're kind of quiet," she said suddenly, wiping the plate. Her voice was cautious, as if she was testing him. "Tired," he answered without looking at her. Water flowed down his hands, washing away the remaining sauce. "Job?" she asked, putting the plate in the cabinet. "Yes," he lied. He didn't want to tell the truth. Not now. Not while the kids are home. But his patience was cracking like an old bridge under too heavy a load. Sophia fell silent, wiping off the next plate. Ethan looked at her hands, thin fingers, short nails, the wedding ring he put on her 15 years ago. He remembered that day, the small church in the suburbs, her white dress, her tears when she said yes. Then he thought it was forever. Now he didn't know what to believe. "Are you sure you're okay?" she asked again, and a note of anxiety flashed in her voice. She looked at him, holding her gaze for the first time that evening. Ethan met her eyes. They were blue, like the sky over Lake Tahoe, but now there was something else in them, fear, guilt. He couldn't make it out. His throat tightened, and he almost asked outright, "Who is Ryan?" But instead he nodded. "Yeah, just tired." She turned away, and he saw her shoulders relax. She believed, or she pretended to. Ethan finished the last pan, dried his hands, and threw the towel on the table. "I'll go out into the yard," he said, without waiting for an answer. She muttered something like, "Okay," but he was already walking toward the back door. It was cool outside. The wind stirred the leaves of the old oak tree, and Ethan sat on the bench under it, looking at the dark sky. It was quiet here, only the faint noise of cars coming from the highway in the distance. He took a pack of cigarettes from his pocket, an old habit that he had almost given up, but which sometimes returned. He lit one, took a drag, and exhaled the smoke, watching it dissolve into the air. He had to talk to her. Today, after the children fall asleep. He couldn't live with this anymore, with her lies, with her secrets, with this mask they both wore. But how to start? How to tell his wife, the mother of his children, that he knows? Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the cigarette tremble in his fingers. He wasn't afraid of her answer. He was afraid of what would happen next. Ethan sat on a bench under an oak tree, finishing his cigarette. The smoke rose upward, dissolving into the dark sky, where the first stars had already appeared. The wind was picking up, chilling his skin through his thin t-shirt, but he didn't notice it. His thoughts were too loud, too heavy to pay attention to anything else. In the house behind him, the kitchen light went out. Sophia had finished cleaning and had probably gone upstairs. The children were already in their rooms, and silence enveloped the cottage like a dense fog. This was his chance. It's now or never. He put out his cigarette on the edge of the bench, threw it into the grass, and stood up. My knees cracked. Old injuries from the army reminded me of themselves at such moments. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the cold air burn his lungs, and headed for the back door. His steps were heavy, as if he was dragging an invisible weight behind him. He knew this conversation would change everything. Maybe it will destroy it. But he could not remain silent any longer. The house was silent, except for the faint hum of the television coming from the living room. Ethan walked through the kitchen, where the smell of garlic and tomato sauce still lingered, and went up the stairs. The door to the bedroom was slightly open, and he heard a rustle. Sophia was changing clothes, taking off her business suit. He knocked, although it was more of a formality, and pushed the door open. She stood by the closet in an old t-shirt and shorts, folding her jacket. Her blonde hair fell to her shoulders, and in the soft light of the lamp, she looked almost like that girl from Lake Tahoe, young, carefree. But it was an illusion. Ethan knew that the real Sophia, the one who hides the phone and lies to his face, is somewhere under this shell. "We need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. His voice was low, hard, like a concrete slab. Sophia froze, then slowly turned around. Her blue eyes met his, and something flashed in them: fear, astonishment. She quickly looked down, fiddling with the hem of her t-shirt. "About what? You look weird." "Strange," he repeated, and there was bitter mockery in his voice. "Maybe because I'm tired of pretending that everything is fine." She frowned, taking a step back towards the closet. "What do you mean? If it's about work, I told you." "This isn't about work," he interrupted, taking a step closer. "This is about you, about us, about what you are hiding." Sophia turned pale. Her hand twitched as if she wanted to grab something, but stopped. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you understand?" Ethan clenched his fists, feeling his nails digging into his palms. "Then explain to me who Ryan is, and why does he text you at 6 in the morning?" The silence collapsed like glass broken by a stone. Sophia opened her mouth, but didn't make a sound. Her eyes widened, and he saw her chest rise and fall rapidly. She was caught. and she knew it. Where are you from? She began, but her voice broke. She swallowed, trying to pull herself together. Did you go through my phone? It was vibrating under your pillow, Ethan said, not looking away. I saw a name and a message. See you at 8? Don't be late. Are you in the shower? Is that a client or someone else? Sophia turned away, pressing her hand to her forehead. Her shoulders shook, and for a second he thought she was going to cry. But when she looked at him again, her eyes were dry and her face tense. You weren't supposed to see that, she said quietly. Shouldn't have. His voice became louder, almost a scream, but he restrained himself, remembering the children behind the wall. Are you serious? You hide messages from me, lie to my face, and I shouldn't have seen it. Quiet, she hissed, glancing at the door. The children will hear. Children, he repeated, and the word sounded like an accusation. Do you think about them when you text your Ryan, or when you're late at work? Sophia pursed her lips, her face turning red. It's not what you think, she said, but her voice was shaking. Ryan is a colleague. We are working on a project. Sometimes he writes early because we have different schedules. Colleague, Ethan stepped closer, looking her straight in the eyes. A colleague who knows when you're in the shower, who puts smiley faces and waits for you at 8 in the morning. Do you really think that I will believe this nonsense? She was silent, head down. Her fingers fiddled with the hem of her t-shirt, and he saw her struggling with herself, with the truth, with him. Finally, she exhaled and looked up. Okay, she said quietly, it's not just work, but it's not what you think. Then what is it? He barked, losing patience. Explain to me, Sophia, because I see only one thing: you are cheating on me. The word hung in the air, heavy and sharp, like a knife. Sophia flinched as if he had hit her. It's not cheating, she said, but her voice was weak, unsure. We just communicate. He was there when I was sick. You're always busy, Ethan. You don't notice me. Don't notice? He stepped even closer, and now only a meter separated them. I work so that we can have this house, so that the kids go to a good school, so that you can have your damn career. And you find someone who will notice you? Is that your excuse? That's no excuse, she snapped, her voice sharper. It's true. After Mason was born, everything changed. You became different, practical, cold. You build bridges, but you don't see that our marriage is falling apart. Ethan froze. Her words hit like a hammer on an anvil. He remembered those years, how Mason was born, how they slept 3 hours a night, how he took overtime to cover the bills. He thought he was doing this for them. For her. Am I cold? He asked, and his voice trembled. And you stopped talking to me. You stopped laughing. You went into your work, into your world, and now you blame me. I don't blame, she said, but her eyes were shining with tears. I was lonely. Ryan, he just listened. It started out as a friendship. Friendship, he repeated sarcastically. A friendship that starts at 6 in the morning with messages about a shower. Did you sleep with him? Sophia pulled back, her face distorted. No, she said quickly. No, I didn't. It didn't go that far. I swear. You swear? He shook his head, feeling anger mixed with pain. Am I supposed to believe? After all these lies? She was silent, looking at the floor. Her hands were shaking, and he could see her struggling with herself. Finally, she looked up. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said quietly. I was going to stop this. I needed something that we don't have anymore. Ethan looked at her, and something burst in his chest. He wanted to scream, wanted to break something, but instead he turned and left the room. His footsteps echoed down the stairs as he descended. He couldn't stay there any longer, listening to her excuses, her voice. He ran out into the backyard and stopped by an oak tree, breathing heavily. The wind whipped across his face, but he did not feel the cold. He put his hands on his knees, trying to breathe, but the air seemed thick like tar. She confessed. Not in betrayal, not really, but in the fact that someone else took his place. Ryan. The name burned him like acid. He straightened up, looking at the oak tree, the tree he had planted for Emily, for their family. Now it seemed like a mockery. Ethan heard footsteps behind him. Sophia left the house, throwing a sweater over her t-shirt. Her eyes were red, but she didn't cry. "We can't leave it like this," she said, coming closer. "Talk to me." "Shall we talk?" He turned to her, his voice hoarse with anger. "Do you think words will fix this? You betrayed me, Sophia. You betrayed us." "I didn't mean to," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm just lost." "Lost," he repeated, and his lips curled into a bitter smile. "And me, am I lost too? Or am I just a fool who believed in all this time? You." She stepped towards him, holding out her hand, but he retreated. "Don't touch me," he said quietly but firmly. "I don't know what to do with this, but I know one thing: I can't go on like this." Sophia froze, her hand hanging in the air. "What does it mean?" she asked, and fear flashed in her voice. Ethan looked at her, at his wife, the mother of his children, the woman he loved, and I didn't find an answer. He turned and went to the bench, leaving her standing under the oak tree. Ethan did not sleep after the conversation at the oak tree. He spent the night in the garage, sitting on an old chair by the workbench, looking at the Kawasaki Vulcan 900 motorcycle. Dust covered its black body like a layer of oblivion, and he ran his finger along the seat, leaving a thin line. He once dreamed of riding it with Sophia. She would sit behind him, hugging him, laughing at the speed. Now that dream was as dead as their marriage. Her words burned him all night. "I was lonely." He was nearby. And then her trembling, her evasiveness, it didn't go that far. He knew she was lying. He felt it in her gaze, in her voice, in her hands, which could not find peace. She slept with Ryan, and it was killing him. When the first rays of sun broke through the cloudy garage window, Ethan stood up. His body ached from sitting for a long time, his eyes burned from fatigue, but his mind was clear as never before. He couldn't stay with her. It wasn't a flash of anger or an impulse. It was a cold, deliberate choice forged through hours of reflection. She betrayed him with more than just words or flirting. She gave herself to another physically, intentionally, and he couldn't live with it. He left the garage, went into the kitchen, and poured himself some water from the tap. The glass was cold in his hands, and he drank it in one gulp, feeling the moisture wash away the dryness in his throat. Sophia came down a few minutes later, dressed for work. Dark skirt, white blouse, hair in a neat bun. She looked collected, but her eyes were red, and there were dark shadows underneath them that makeup did not hide. She stood in the doorway, looking at him, and her hand trembled as she placed the thermal mug on the table. "Good morning," she said quietly, her voice hoarse, as if after a sleepless night. Ethan didn't answer. He put the glass on the table and looked at her. Her phone lay next to her, face down, as always. She reached out to take it, but froze under his gaze and retreated. "Are you not talking to me?" she asked, her tone cautious, almost pleading. "You lied to me," he said, his voice level but seething inside. "Yesterday, you said that you didn't sleep with him, but that's not true, right?" Sophia turned pale. Her eyes widened and she opened her mouth, but didn't make a sound. Her hand gripped the edge of the table, her fingers turning white from tension. "Ethan, she began, but her voice broke. "Don't lie to me again," he interrupted, his voice sharper. "I've known you for 15 years. I can tell when you're lying. You slept with Ryan. Say it." She swallowed, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Tears flashed in her eyes, but she did not cry. Finally, she lowered her head and whispered, "Yes." One word, short, like a knife blow. Ethan felt his heart clench and then shatter into pieces. He expected it, he suspected it, but to hear it was different. It was like a blow to the chest, like falling into the void. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms, and he forced himself to breathe. "When?" he asked, his voice hoarse, almost foreign. Sophia looked up, her face wet with tears. "A few weeks ago," she said quietly. in his apartment. After work, it was one time. Once, he repeated, his lips curling into a bitter smile. You just went to him and slept with him, consciously? Yes, she said, her voice shaking. I don't know why. I was angry, lonely. He, he made me feel needed. It was a mistake. Error, he barked, losing control. You deliberately went to bed with him, and now you call it a mistake? Do you even understand what you did? I'm sorry, she whispered, looking at him through her tears. I didn't want to hurt you. I regretted it right away. I love you, Ethan. Do you love me? He stepped towards her. His voice became cold as steel. You don't know what love is. You betrayed me. You betrayed him and Mace. You destroyed everything. Sophia began to sob, her body shaking. We can fix this, she said, holding out her hand. Please, for the sake of the children, I will do whatever you want. Ethan stepped back, his face contorted with anger and pain. No, he said firmly, nothing can be fixed. I'm filing for divorce, and I want you to leave home. Today. She froze, her hand hanging in the air. Divorce, she whispered, as if not believing. You can't just do that. We've been together for 15 years. You ruined these 15 years, he said, looking into her eyes. You slept with him. You lied to me. I can't live with this. Leave. Where should I go? She asked, her voice breaking. This is my home, too. Not anymore, he snapped. This house is mine. I inherited it. I rebuilt it. We have a marriage contract, and it will protect me. Pack your things and leave. Sophia looked at him, her tears flowing silently. Won't you give me a chance? She asked. Her voice was weak, almost dead. You took your chance, he said, turning to the door. I don't want to see you when I get back from work. He walked out of the kitchen, his steps echoing through the house. He heard her sobs behind him, but did not stop. He went down to the garage, got into the pickup truck, and started the engine. His hands shook on the steering wheel, but he squeezed them tighter, forcing himself to breathe. It was done. He said it. Divorce. The word was like a hammer blow, but it brought liberation, bitter, difficult, but real. Ethan pulled out of the driveway and drove toward the river, the same place where he had thrown out their photo yesterday. He parked near the shore, got out, and stood by the water. The sun was rising, painting the river in golden tones. He remembered the prenuptial agreement signed before the wedding. His mother insisted, just in case, son, and he then laughed, sure that Sophia was his forever. Now he mentally thanked her for this. He took out his phone and dialed Nathan Parker, his friend and lawyer. He answered after the second ring, cheerful as always. Hey, soldier, what's wrong? I need a divorce, Ethan said without preamble. Can you help? Nathan whistled. Damn, seriously? What did she do? Slept with someone else, Ethan said, his voice shaking. With a colleague, consciously, confessed in the morning. Oh my God, Nathan breathed. I sympathize, brother. Do you have a contract? Yes, he replied. In the safe at home. Great, Nathan said, becoming businesslike. Bring him to me. If he is strong, you are in a good position. The house is yours, the assets too. She will receive the minimum. When do you want to start? Today, said Ethan. I kicked her out. I want everything to be quick. Got it, Nathan replied. Come by 10. I'll start preparing the papers. Ethan nodded, hung up, and looked at the river. The wind hit his face, but he did not feel the cold. He imagined her with Ryan, her hands on him, her lips, her body. She chose this. Not on impulse, not by mistake, consciously. It burned him, but he forced himself to exhale. This is the end. He didn't know how he would tell the children, how he would explain that his mother had left. But he knew he couldn't stay with her after that. He got back into the pickup and drove to work. The day passed in a fog, drawings, conversations with Tyler, water from the cooler. His thoughts were at home. Is she packing? Does Ryan call? He hoped she would leave quietly. When he returned at 6 in the evening, her car was gone. The house was empty, the kitchen was clean, its smell had disappeared. In the bedroom, her closet was empty, there was a note on the bed. I went to see a friend. I'll call you later. Sorry. Her wedding ring lay nearby. Ethan took it, clenched it in his fist, and threw it into the drawer. Then he went out into the backyard with a mug of water and sat under an oak tree. The sunset painted the sky crimson. That was the end. And the beginning. He was free, broken, but free. Ethan stood in the backyard, watching the sunset as the crimson streaks slowly dissolved into the dark sky. The mug of water in his hand was already warm, but he did not notice it. The silence of the house behind him was deafening. Sophia's absence felt like an emptiness that could not be filled. Her note, her ring, her empty closet, all this confirmed that she had left. He kicked her out in the morning, and she complied, leaving him alone in this big cottage on the hill. But he wasn't alone. The children were inside, and he knew that now he would have to tell them the truth. He took a deep breath, feeling the cold evening air fill his lungs, and turned towards the house. His steps on the grass were heavy, as if he were walking onto a battlefield, and not into the living room of his children. Ethan entered through the back door, placed his mug on the kitchen table, and listened. There was a faint noise coming from the living room. The TV was on, showing some kind of cartoon. Mason was there, probably with his feet on the couch, as usual. Emily is most likely upstairs, staring at her tablet. They did not yet know that their world was about to collapse. Ethan went into the living room. Mason was sitting on the sofa, his blonde hair disheveled, and his eyes sparkling with laughter at some joke on the screen. He was 10 and still a child, carefree, trusting, believing that his parents were always there. Ethan stood in the doorway, looking at his son, and felt his throat tighten. How to tell him? How to explain that Mom will never return home? Mace, he called, trying to keep his voice level. Turn off the TV. We need to talk. Mason turned, his smile fading when he saw his father's face. What happened, Dad? He asked, pressing the remote control. The screen went dark and silence filled the room. Call him, Ethan said, sitting down in the chair opposite the sofa. This is important. Mason nodded, stood up, and ran towards the stairs. Come down. Dad's calling, he shouted, his voice echoing in the house. A minute later, footsteps were heard on the stairs. Emily came down, her dark hair pulled back into a messy ponytail, and she was holding a tablet in her hands. She was 14 and no longer the little girl who drew him Father's Day cards. Now she was a teenager, withdrawn, sarcastic, with a look that saw more than she said. She looked at Ethan, narrowing her eyes. What again? She asked, sitting down on the sofa next to Mason. Ethan folded his hands in his lap, looking at them. His children, his world. He built this house for them, worked overtime to make sure they had everything: school, bicycles, a future. And now he had to destroy their illusion of family. He coughed, clearing his throat, and began. Guys, he said quietly, I need to tell you something. It's not easy, but you have to know. Mom won't be living with us anymore. Silence. Mason blinked, his face scrunched up in confusion. What do you mean will not live? He asked, his voice high and childish. Did she go on a business trip? Ethan shook his head. No, Mace, she left. Her and I. We won't be together anymore. I asked her to leave today. Emily straightened up, her tablet falling onto the sofa. Did you kick her out? She asked, her voice harsh, almost accusing. Why? Ethan met her gaze. Her eyes, as dark as his, burned with a mixture of anger and fear. He knew she wouldn't take it easily. She was too smart, too observant. Because she did something I can't forgive, he said, trying to keep his voice calm. She was with another man, not just as a friend. Mason frowned, his eyebrows knitted together. With someone else? How's that? He asked, and his innocence cut Ethan like a knife. Emily turned to her brother, her face turning red. Are you stupid? She cheated on Dad. With another man. Got it. Mason blinked, his eyes widening. Like, like in the movies, he asked quietly. Mom with someone else? Yes, Ethan said, his voice firm, but inside he was crumbling. I found out yesterday. She confessed this morning. I couldn't leave it like that. So I told her to leave. Emily jumped up from the sofa, her hands clenched into fists. You kicked her out because of this. You just took her and threw her out? What about us? We don't count? Sit down, Ethan said, raising his hand. I didn't just take it and throw it out. She betrayed us, all of us. I can't live with her after what she did. You can't, she shouted, her voice breaking. Can I? She's my mother. Do you think I don't care what she did? But you didn't even give her a chance to explain herself. She explained, he said, his tone growing colder. She slept with him, consciously, in his apartment. It's not a mistake, Em. It's a choice. Emily froze, her eyes filled with tears. So what now? Are we just going to forget her? Are you going to cut her out of our lives? No, Ethan said, his voice wavering. She is still your mother. You will be able to see her. But she will not live here. I am filing for divorce. Mason began to cry. Quietly, almost silently, but tears flowed down his cheeks, and he wiped them with his sleeve. Why did she do this? He asked, looking at his father. She doesn't love us? Ethan felt his heart break. He stood up, walked over to his son, and sat down next to him, putting his arm around his shoulders. She loves you, he said, although the words burned in his throat. This is not about you. This is about her and me. Sometimes adults do stupid things that ruin everything, but you are important to her, and to me. Mason clung to him, his tears soaking Ethan's t-shirt. I don't want her to go, he whispered. I want everything to be as before. I know, Mace, Ethan said, patting his head. I wanted it too, but it won't work out that way. Emily stood by the sofa, her hands shaking. You're selfish, she said, her voice filled with anger. You think only about yourself. What about us? Where is she now? Where did she go? To a friend, Ethan answered, looking at his daughter. She left a note. She said she'd call. You can talk to her when she's ready. When will she be ready? Emily repeated, her voice getting louder. What if I want it now? You didn't even ask us. You just decided for everyone. That's enough, Ethan said, his patience cracking. I didn't want this. She made a choice, and I had to do something. I can't live with her after she slept with someone else. You'll understand that when you get older. I don't want to understand, she screamed, her tears finally breaking through. I hate you for this. She turned and ran upstairs, slamming the door to her room so hard the house shook. Ethan sat with Mason, feeling his son tremble in his arms. He looked at the empty sofa where Emily had just been and felt crushed. He expected this anger, tears, accusations, but it was harder to survive than he thought. His children were suffering, and he could not protect them. Not from this. Dad, Mason whispered, raising his tear-stained face. Are we going to stay here? Yes, Ethan said, squeezing his shoulder. You will stay with me. This house is ours. I will take care of you. And Mom, he asked, his voice weak. She'll be around somewhere, Ethan replied. You will be able to see her, but she will live separately. Mason nodded, wiped his nose on his sleeve, and snuggled up to his father. Ethan held him until the tears subsided, and then helped him up. Go wash yourself, he said softly, and go to bed. Tomorrow it will be easier. Mason went upstairs. His steps were slow, like an old man's. Ethan remained in the living room, looking at the turned-off TV. He heard the water running in the upstairs bathroom and the door to Mason's room slamming. And then silence. Only the faint sound of music from Emily's room, muffled by the walls. She was angry, and he couldn't blame her. She loved her mother. They both loved each other, but he couldn't forgive. Ethan stood up, walked into the kitchen, and opened the safe in the pantry. There lay the marriage contract, a yellowed document signed 15 years ago. He took it, feeling the weight of the paper in his hands. It was his shield, his protection. The house will remain with him, as will the children. Sophia will get little, maybe nothing, if Nathan does everything right. He put the contract in his bag in preparation for his meeting with the lawyer in the morning. Then he returned to the living room and sat down on the sofa, where Emily's tablet was still lying. He took it. The screen lit up a screensaver with her favorite band. Ethan turned it off and put it on the table. His gaze fell on the photo on the shelf him, Sophia, Emily, and Mason at Lake Tahoe 5 years ago. They smiled, hugging each other. He stood up, took the frame, and put it in a drawer. It was unbearable to look at her. He went up to the bedroom, lay down on the bed, and closed his eyes. Sleep did not come. Ethan sat in the living room, looking at the turned-off TV. The lights in the house were turned off, except for the dim lamp on the table, which cast long shadows on the walls. It was already past midnight, but he could not bring himself to go up to the bedroom. The bed felt strange without Sophia, although her leaving was his decision. He told her to leave in the morning, and she left, leaving a note and a ring. The children knew the truth. Emily hated him for it, Mason cried, asking if Mom would come back. Their pain pressed down on him like a concrete slab, but he could not retreat, not after she slept with Ryan, consciously, in his apartment. He stood up, feeling his joints crack from sitting for too long, and walked into the kitchen. A glass of water was his only companion today. He drank it slowly, looking at the empty table. The phone was nearby, but Sophia didn't call. Maybe she was with a friend, as she wrote. Maybe with Ryan. This thought burned him like hot metal, and he squeezed the glass harder than necessary. The glass creaked in his hand, but did not break. He put it on the table and headed into the garage. The door creaked as he entered, and the smell of dust and oil filled his nose. Here stood his Kawasaki Vulcan 900 motorcycle, black, covered with a layer of dust, like a forgotten relic from another life. Ethan walked up to him and ran his finger along the seat, leaving a long stripe. He bought it after the Army in 2008, with his first savings. Then he was full of hope. He had just met Sophia, dreamed of the future. He imagined how they would ride together, how she would hug him from behind, laughing at the speed. Now that dream was as dead as their marriage. He sat on an old chair by the workbench, looking at the motorcycle. His hands lay on his knees, but his fingers trembled not from the cold, but from the tension that he had carried within himself all day. He remembered renovating it during his early years with Sophia. She went into the garage, brought him water, and joked that he loved iron more than her. Then he laughed, waved it off, and said that she was his main passion. Now he realized how long ago this had not been true. Ethan leaned forward, rested his elbows on his knees, and covered his face with his hands. He did not cry, no tears came, although the pain was deep, like a wound. Instead, he saw her Sophia with Ryan. Her confession in the morning flashed through his head like scenes from a movie. Yes, a few weeks ago, in his apartment, after work. She didn't blame the wine, didn't say it was an accident. She chose this, consciously, and this clarity made everything worse. She didn't just stumble, she turned away from him, from their family, from everything they had been building for 15 years. He remembered their early years. They met in a cafe where she worked as a waitress. Her blonde hair fell in her face as she set the coffee in front of him, and her smile was like the sun after a long night in Iraq. He returned there every day until he decided to ask her out. 3 months later, he proposed to her. He got down on his knee right in that cafe, among the tables and the smell of pies. She laughed, said yes, and he thought it was forever. They bought this house, his parents' old cottage, which he rebuilt with his own hands. They painted the walls, argued about the color, and laughed when the paint got on her nose. Then he felt alive. Ethan straightened up, looking at the workbench. There were old tools lying there, wrenches, screwdrivers, a hammer. He took the hammer and squeezed it in his hand, feeling the coldness of the metal. He could have broken something, a motorcycle, a wall, himself. But instead he put it back, his hand shaking. He didn't want to be destroyed. He wanted to protect. Myself, children, this house. He remembered how Emily was born. Sophia screamed in the hospital, squeezing his hand until her nails left marks on his skin. When he first took his daughter small, with dark hair like his, he felt that everything made sense. Then there was Mason Calm, fair-haired, like his mother. They were family. They coped with sleepless nights, with debt, with his overtime and her career. But somewhere along the way, everything broke. She went into her work, he into his. They stopped talking, laughing, and being together. And now she lay with Ryan in his apartment while he built bridges and believed that their marriage could still be saved. Ethan stood up, walked over to the motorcycle, and ran his hand along the handlebars. He hasn't driven it for 3 years. The last time I was with Mason, they were driving around the block, and my son was squealing with delight. Sophia then looked from the porch, smiled, and waved. He thought she was happy. Now he realized that it was a mask. She was already moving away, already looking for something else. But he didn't see, or didn't want to see. He returned to the chair, sat down, and closed his eyes. The silence of the garage was heavy, but there was something soothing about it. Her voice, her tears, her lies were not here, just him and his thoughts. He remembered how he kicked her out in the morning. Her tears, her "I'm sorry," her pleas for a chance. He said no. He couldn't forgive. Not after she knowingly slept with someone else. This was not just a betrayal, it was the end. And he knew he did the right thing, even if the kids hated him for it. Ethan opened his eyes, looking at the motorcycle. He could fix it. Remove dust, change oil, start the engine. It would be something of his, not hers, not theirs. He gave it up for the sake of my family, for her sake. Now he could take that part back. But not today. Today he was too broken. He remembered the army, the nights in the tent, when Nathan told him about his dream of becoming a lawyer. "You will find yours too, soldier," he said, and Ethan believed. He found Sophia, a job, a family, and now I've lost half of it. Ethan woke up to a faint light coming through the curtains. He was lying on the bed on top of the blanket, still wearing the jeans and t-shirt he'd worn in the garage the night before. The clock on the nightstand said 6:45. He hadn't slept until dawn, but had apparently dozed off for an hour or two. His body ached, as if after a long shift at a construction site, and his head was as heavy as a concrete block. The night without sleep left its mark, but he did not regret it. He stood up, stretched, feeling his joints crack, and went down to the kitchen. The house was quiet, the children were still sleeping. Their upstairs doors remained closed. Ethan poured himself some water from the tap and drank it slowly, looking at the empty table. Sophia's note was still lying where he left it yesterday. "I went to see a friend. I'll call you later. Sorry." He took the paper, crumpled it, and threw it in the trash. He put the ring in the drawer yesterday. It was unbearable to look at it. The phone vibrated on the table, and Ethan jumped. The screen lit up her name, Sophia. He stared at him, feeling the blood pounding in his temples. She didn't call yesterday, and he thought she would give him more time. But here she is less than a day after leaving. He clenched his jaw, fighting the urge to hang up the call. No, he must answer. Gotta hear what she has to say. He took the phone, swiped his finger across the screen, and brought it to his ear. "Yes," he said, his voice as cold as the morning air. "Ethan," her voice was quiet, hoarse, as if she had been crying. "We need to talk." "We talked," he replied, sitting down at the table. "You said everything you need to say. Me too." "No," she said, her tone sharper. "You didn't give me a chance. You kicked me out without listening. I want to explain myself." "Explain yourself?" He grinned, but there was no fun in it. "You slept with Ryan, in his apartment, consciously. What is there to explain?" She fell silent, and he heard her breathing fast, uneven. "Yes," she said finally, "I did it, and I'm sorry, but you don't understand why." "Then enlighten me," he said, his voice growing louder. "Why did my wife, the mother of my children, go to bed with someone else? Because I really wonder how you will justify this." "I don't make excuses," she said, and there was anger in her voice. "I'm trying to explain. Do you think it was easy? Do you think I just woke up one day and decided to destroy our family?" "You did," he interrupted. "You chose him. You went to him. It was not an impulse, not a mistake. You said it yourself. Yes, she snapped. I went to him. Because I was tired of feeling invisible. You were always at work, Ethan. You build bridges, drawings, projects, but where am I? Where are we? You stopped seeing me. Ethan squeezed the phone until his fingers turned white. Don't blame me, he said, his voice low and menacing. I worked so that we could have this house, so that the children would go to school, so that you could build your career. And you? Did you find yourself a lover because you were bored? It's not about boredom, she said, her voice breaking. It's about loneliness. Ryan, he was kind to me. He listened. He noticed when I was feeling bad. And you came home, said nothing, went into the garage. Do you think I didn't try to talk to you? Do you think I didn't want us back? You could have told, he snapped. You could have come to me instead of going to bed with him. You chose the easiest path. Easy? Her voice became louder, almost a scream. You think it was easy, living with guilt, knowing that I ruined everything? I hated myself for it, Ethan, but I didn't know how else. You could just simply not have sex with someone else, he said, and his words were as sharp as a knife. That would be a good start. She fell silent, and he heard her son. You're cruel, she said finally, her voice weak. You weren't like this before. And you were not a woman of easy virtue, he answered, and his voice trembled. He immediately regretted it, not because it was untrue, but because it hurt him. He closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose with his fingers. I'm not a woman of easy virtue, she said, her voice shaking with tears. I am your wife. I made a mistake, once, and I want to correct it. You are not my wife, he said quietly. You were her. Now you are just a woman who betrayed me, and I can't fix it. No one can. Ethan, please, she said, her voice becoming pleading. Children. What's wrong with them? Did you tell them? Yes, he replied. Yesterday. They know what you did. Em hates me because I kicked you out. Mace cried, asking if you loved him. Are you happy? She began to sob, and the sound was so loud that he pulled the phone away from his ear. I didn't want this, she said through tears. I love them. I love you. I want to come back. You're not coming back, he said, his voice as cold as steel. I'm filing for divorce. I've already talked to the lawyer. The contract is in force. The house is mine. The children are with me. You left, and this is the end. Divorce? Her voice became higher, panicky. You can't just cross me out. I'm their mother. I have rights. You lost your license when you slept with him, he said. You can see the children, but they will live with me. This is not discussed. I will fight, she said, her voice becoming firmer. You think I'll just give up? This is my house too. I invested as much into it as you. You didn't invest anything, he said, his tone harsh. I inherited it. I rebuilt it. You only lived here, and the contract will prove it. You don't know what will prove it, she snapped. I'll hire a lawyer. I won't let you take everything, and I won't give up the children. Try it, he said, his voice calm, but inside he was seething. Let's see what the court says when they find out that you cheated, consciously. She fell silent, her breathing heavy. Won't you give me a chance? She asked finally. Her voice was weak, almost dead. You took your chance, he said. When I went to see him, goodbye, Sophia. He hung up without waiting for an answer. The phone fell onto the table with a thud, and Ethan covered his face with his hands. His heart was pounding, anger mixing with pain like acid in his veins. She will fight. He knew it. She won't give up just like that. That's not her style. But he was ready. The contract, Nathan, it's true it was all on his side. Ethan stood up, walked to the sink, and splashed water on his face. Cold moisture flowed down my cheeks, washing away fatigue, but not pain. He had to wake up the children, take them to school, and go to Nathan. But this call unsettled him. She blamed him. She wanted to go back. She threatened to sue. And all this after she betrayed him. He heard footsteps on the stairs. Mason came down. His eyes were red, but he didn't cry. "Dad," he said quietly, "did Mom call?" "Yes," Ethan replied, wiping his face with a towel. "Just now. She wants to talk to you. Later." "Will she come back?" Mason asked, his voice weak. "No," Ethan said, looking at his son. "But she will see you. I promise." Mason nodded, sat down at the table, and picked up a bowl of cereal. Ethan looked at him, feeling guilt tightening his chest. Ethan stood at the school gates, watching Emily and Mason disappear into the crowd of students. The morning was cold, the sky was overcast with gray clouds, and the wind blew fallen leaves along the asphalt. He drove the kids to school after Sophia called, her voice still ringing in his ears, her threats of legal action and accusations that he didn't see her. Mason was quiet, picking at his cereal and asking about his mother. Emily didn't say a word. Her anger was like a wall between them. Ethan gripped the pickup truck's steering wheel, feeling the fatigue pressing on his shoulders, but he couldn't stop. Today, he was supposed to meet with Nathan. He got into the car, started the engine, and drove into downtown Richmond. The road was familiar. He had passed these streets hundreds of times, but today everything seemed foreign. Thoughts about Sophia swirled in my head like a swarm of wasps. Her words, "I won't let you take everything," burned him like acid. He won't let her win. Not after this. Nathan's office was in an old brick building on Main Street, with a Parker and Associates sign above the entrance. Ethan parked, took the bag with a marriage contract, and went inside. The secretary, the same girl with bright nails, smiled at him. "Mr. Reynolds, they're waiting for you," she said, nodding toward the door at the end of the corridor. Ethan walked inside, pushing open the heavy wooden door. Nathan was sitting at a table littered with folders and papers. His dark hair was disheveled, and his shirt was slightly wrinkled. He looked the same as he did in the army, a little scruffy, but sharp as a blade. He looked up when he saw Ethan and stood up, holding out his hand. "Hey, soldier," he said with a slight smile. "You look like you haven't slept in a week." "Night," Ethan replied, shaking his hand and sitting down opposite him. "I didn't sleep at night." Nathan nodded, sitting back down. "Children?" he asked, his tone becoming more serious. "Yes," Ethan said, placing his bag on the table. "And she, called in the morning, threatened with legal action." Nathan whistled, leaning back in his chair. "She's fast," he said. "What did you say?" "Which won't give up," Ethan replied, taking out the contract and placing it in front of Nathan. "She wants a house, children. She says that she has invested as much in it as I have, that I will not give her a chance." "A chance," Nathan chuckled, taking the contract and opening it. "She slept with someone else. Consciously, as you said. What chance does she have after this?" "I don't know," Ethan said, clenching his fists. "She blames me. She says I didn't notice her, that she was lonely. Ryan was kind and listened. Nonsense." Nathan flipped through the contract, his eyes quickly scanning the lines. "Her guilt does not change the facts," he said. "This document is your armor. The house is yours, inherited from your parents. You rebuilt it before marriage, right?" "Yes," Ethan nodded. "We moved in after the wedding, but the foundation is mine." "Great," Nathan said, making a note on his pad. "She may claim that she invested emotional labor or money, but the court rarely considers this if the property is yours to begin with. Assets?" "Separate," said Ethan. "I have a bill from work, a pension. She has her salary. We didn't mix." "Clever," Nathan nodded. "The contract confirms this. She will receive the minimum, maybe child support, if the court decides. But custody is another matter. Do you want to be full?" "Yes," Ethan said, his voice firm. "They stay with me. She can see them, but they will live here." Nathan tapped his pen on the table, looking at him. "The court likes stability," he said. "You are in a house, with a job, without stains. Her infidelity is a trump card against her. But she is their mother. If she proves that she can give them a home, the court may grant joint custody." "She's at a friend's," Ethan said. She has no home. There is no stability. Bye, Nathan clarified. She can rent an apartment, find a better job. She's a sales manager, right? Yes, Ethan nodded. He makes good money, but not enough to buy a house right away. This is good for us, Nathan said, opening his laptop. I'll start with the divorce notice. She'll receive it in a couple of days. Then we'll file a lawsuit. Virginia gives a year with children, but we can speed it up if she doesn't contest. She will, Ethan said, his voice growing darker. She said she would hire a lawyer. She wants to fight. Let him try, said Nathan, his eyes sparkling. We will prove treason. Do you have anything, messages, recordings? Only her confession, said Ethan. In the morning, she said that she slept with him once in his apartment after work, consciously. Word against word, Nathan said, frowning. If she refuses to go to court, we need evidence. Did you look at the phone? No, said Ethan. Saw the messages in the morning before she left. See you at 8. You're in the shower. But I didn't save it. It's a pity, said Nathan. If she didn't delete it, it would be gold. But her confession is already something. Did the children hear? No, Ethan shook his head. I told them yesterday that she was with someone else. I didn't go into details. Okay, Nathan nodded. Don't drag them in until the court asks. They're already in shock. Ethan clenched his fists, remembering their faces. Em hates me, he said quietly. Mace asked if she loved him. I don't know how to protect them. Nathan put down his pen, looking at him. You can't, he said softly. They will get hurt. It's inevitable. But you give them stability, a home, she ruined it, not you. She blames me, Ethan said, his voice shaking. She said I stopped seeing her, that I was to blame for her loneliness. Nonsense, Nathan snapped. She slept with him. It's her choice, not your fault. Don't let her fool you. Ethan nodded, but Sophia's words still stung. He saw her every day, every evening, but maybe not like before. He remembered how she sat at the table, looking at the phone, how her smile faded. He thought it was fatigue, and she went to Ryan, consciously. What's next? He asked, getting back to business. I'm preparing a notice, Nathan said, typing on his laptop. You will receive a copy. She will answer either agree or start a war. If there is war, we will use contract and treason. Are you ready for this? Yes, Ethan said, his voice firm. She won't take the children. And the house. Then we're in, Nathan said, smiling. I remember how you talked about her in Iraq. You were shining, brother. I'm sorry it happened like that. Me too, Ethan said, clenching his fists. But I won't back down. Don't, said Nathan. I'll cover you. Like in the army. Remember that patrol in Baghdad, when you almost blew yourself up on a tripwire? Ethan grinned for the first time that day. You pulled me out by the scruff of the neck. You shouted that I was an idiot. You were, Nathan said, laughing. But I didn't let you fly, and now I won't let her drown you. Thank you, Ethan said, and his voice was sincere. Nathan was his anchor then and now. Will you stay? Nathan asked, nodding towards the coffee maker in the corner. I'll cook you something. No, Ethan said, standing up. I'll go to work. Call me when the papers are ready. Agreed, Nathan nodded. Hold on, soldier. Ethan left the office, went down to the pickup truck, and got behind the wheel. He didn't go to work right away. He turned towards the river, parked near the shore, and got out. The water flowed slowly, reflecting the gray sky. He stood there, feeling the wind, and thought about the children, about Sophia, about her threats. She will fight. But he was ready. The contract, Nathan, it's true it was all on his side. He won't let her win. Not after what she did. Ethan sat at his desk in the Harrington and Sons office, looking at the blueprints for the bridge. Lines and numbers blurred before his eyes. He could not concentrate. The morning with Nathan gave him clarity about the divorce, but did not remove the weight from his chest. Sophia threatened to sue, the children suffered, and he felt like an engineer whose project was collapsing under its own weight. He rubbed his temples, trying to push away the fatigue when his phone vibrated on the table. The number was unfamiliar, but the code was local. He frowned and answered. "Mr. Reynolds?" The voice on the other end was female, stern, with a slight accent. "This is Mrs. Carter, the assistant principal at Richmond Hill High School. We have a problem with your daughter, Emily." Ethan straightened up, his heart squeezing. "What's happened?" he asked, his voice harsh. "She ran away from class," Mrs. Carter said. "The teacher found her in the toilet. She was crying and screaming. We can't calm her down. You need to come." "I'm coming," Ethan said, standing up. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. He threw the phone into his pocket, grabbed the keys, and ran out of the office without explaining anything to Tyler, who only raised his eyebrows. The pickup started up the first time, and Ethan drove out onto the highway, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. "Emily ran away from class," I cried. She screamed. He knew it was because of Sophia, because of him, because of everything that had collapsed in the last 2 days. Her "I hate you" echoed in his head last night, and now it has resulted in a school crisis. Richmond Hill School was 10 minutes' drive away, a large red brick building with a green courtyard where the children used to play at lunchtime. Today the yard was empty, classes were going on, and Ethan parked at the entrance, feeling the adrenaline rushing through his temples. He entered the lobby where he was greeted by Mrs. Carter, a short woman of about 50 with short gray hair and a stern look. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, holding out her hand. "This way, please." "Where is she?" he asked, ignoring the formalities. "In the psychologist's office," she answered, leading him down the corridor. "She refused to talk to us. She just screamed that she wanted to go home. This is unusual for her. She is a good student." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. Emily was good, smart, sharp, with a sarcastic streak, but not problematic. Still, he knew it was his fault. And Sophia, her betrayal, his decision to kick her out, all this fell on the shoulders of the children. They stopped at a door with a sign that read "School Psychologist." Mrs. Carter knocked, and a voice from inside said, "Come in." Ethan pushed the door and saw Emily. She sat hunched over in a chair, her dark hair falling in her face, and her eyes were red from crying. Her backpack was lying on the floor, and her hands were clutching her knees. Standing nearby was a woman of about 40, thin, with a soft look, apparently a psychologist. Ethan said, taking a step towards her. She raised her head, her gaze full of anger and pain. "Why are you here?" she shouted, her voice breaking. "Go away. I don't want to see you." "Mr. Reynolds," the psychologist began, standing up. "I'm Miss Landon." "She." "I'll sort it out," he interrupted, not taking his eyes off his daughter. What happened?" "You happened," she shouted, jumping up from her chair. "You kicked Mom out. You ruined everything. I hate you." Ethan froze, her words hitting like a hammer. He saw her tears, her trembling hands, and felt guilt squeezing his chest. Sit down," he said, trying to keep his voice level. "We'll talk." "I don't want to talk," she shouted, her voice echoing in the small room. "You didn't even ask us. You just threw her out like garbage." "She slept with someone else," he said quietly but firmly. "I couldn't leave her at home after that." Emily began to sob, her face distorted. "I don't care," she shouted. "She's my mom. Do you think I want her to leave? Do you think I want to live with you?" He said, taking a step towards her, but she retreated, pressing herself against the wall. "I didn't want this. She made a choice. I had to do something." "You're selfish," she said, her voice shaking. "You only think about yourself. She promised me a trip to Disneyland. She said we would go in the summer. And now what? She left because of you." Ethan frowned. "Disneyland?" he asked, his voice becoming quieter. "Yes," she shouted. "A month ago. She said that we would go with the whole family. But then she canceled, saying that she was busy at work. And now I know why, because of you." "It's not because of me," he said, his tone sharper. She was with Ryan. She chose him over us. You're lying, she shouted, her tears flowing like a stream. You kicked her out. You made her leave. Miss Reynolds, Miss Landon interjected, her voice soft but firm. Please sit down. Let's talk. I don't want to, Emily shouted, rushing to the door. Ethan caught her hand, but she broke free, hitting him in the chest. Let me go. That's enough, he said, his voice getting louder. You won't run away. We'll sort it out. She froze, her tears flowing silently. Then she collapsed back into the chair, covering her face with her hands. Ethan stood over her, feeling his heart pounding. He looked at Miss Landon and Mrs. Carter, who were silent, watching. I'll take her home, he said, his voice hoarse. She needs rest. I agree, Miss Landon said, nodding. She's stressed. We can give her a day, but she needs help. Maybe a family psychologist. I'll think about it, Ethan said, although he knew he wasn't ready for that. He looked at Emily. Went. She didn't move. Her shoulders were shaking. I don't want to go home, she whispered. I want Mom. Ethan clenched his fists, her words cutting him like a knife. She'll call, he said quietly. You can talk to her, but now we are going home. Emily raised her head, her eyes full of pain. You hate her, she said. You want us to hate her too. I don't hate her, he said, although that wasn't true. I can't forgive her. She slept with him, consciously. I can't live with it. Can I? She asked, her voice weak. She's my mother. I know, he said, sitting down next to her. And she will always be your mother. But she won't come home. I'm filing for divorce. Emily began to sob again, burying her face in her knees. Ethan put his hand on her shoulder, but she didn't push him away. He felt her trembling, her pain, and knew that he could not stop her. Mrs. Carter and Miss Landon walked out, leaving them alone. She promised Disneyland, Emily whispered through her tears. She promised that we would be together. She lied, Ethan said quietly. Not for me, for all of us. Emily was silent, her tears dripping onto the floor. Ethan sat next to him, feeling guilt tightening his chest. He kicked Sophia out because he couldn't do otherwise. But now his daughter was falling apart, and he didn't know how to put her back together. Let's go home, he said finally, standing up. You need rest. She picked up her backpack without looking at it and walked towards the door. Ethan followed her, signed the papers with the assistant principal, and led her out to the pickup truck. The way home was spent in silence. She looked out the window. Her eyes were empty. He parked at the house, and she got out, slamming the door. Inside, she went to her room without saying a word. Ethan stood in the kitchen, looking at the empty table. The phone rang. The school was probably being checked. He answered, but it wasn't Mrs. Carter. Ethan, Sophia's voice was hoarse. I got a call from school. What's wrong with him? She's broken, he said coldly. Runned out of class. She screamed that she wanted you. Sophia sobbed. I'll come, she said. I have to see her. Not now, he said. She's not ready, and neither am I. She's my daughter, she said, her voice becoming firmer. You can't stop me. I can, he said, until the court decides. Call her later. He hung up without waiting for an answer. His hands shook, but he clenched them into fists. Emily was suffering, and he couldn't protect her. But he won't let Sophia come back, not after what she did. Ethan was driving through the city, heading home after work. It was Sunday, March 21st, 2025, but he had taken overtime to finish the bridge plans. He needed to keep his head occupied after the school incident with Emily and the day at the track. He felt like a taut string ready to snap. The children stayed at home. Emily locked herself in the room. Mason played video games. He left them a note and food in the refrigerator, hoping they would hold out until he returned. But now, when the sun was setting, fatigue rolled in like a wave, and he decided to stop at a cafe for coffee. He turned to Brew Haven, a small place on the corner where he had once met Sophia. This was their place in the early years. They drank coffee at a table by the window, laughed, made plans. Now he rarely comes here, but today he needed caffeine to avoid falling asleep while driving. Ethan parked the pickup, got out, and headed towards the entrance. The bell above the door tinkled, and the smell of freshly ground grains filled my nose. He stood in line, looking at the menu board, when he heard laughter. This sound was familiar, light, melodic, with a hint of coquetry. His heart sank, and he turned around. Sophia was sitting at a table by the window. Her blonde hair was down, and she smiled, leaning towards the man opposite. Ethan froze. It was him, Ryan. Tall, with dark hair, wearing a neat shirt and jeans. His hand lay on the table, almost touching her fingers, and he laughed back, looking into her eyes. Ethan felt the blood rush to his face. He hadn't seen her since he kicked her out of the house 3 days ago, but her call with threats of legal action still rang in his ears. And now she is here with him. With Ryan. They looked happy, like a couple on a date, and it hit him like a hammer to the chest. He turned away, clenching his fists, and took a step towards the counter. "Black coffee," he told the barista, his voice hoarse. The girl nodded, took his money, and he walked away to the cash window, trying not to look in their direction. But his eyes found her on their own. She leaned closer to Ryan, whispering something, and he nodded, smiling. Her hand touched his, a slight, almost accidental movement, but Ethan knew that it was not accidental. She did this to him once, touched his hand, laughed at his jokes. Now it was for someone else. The coffee was served, and he took the glass, feeling the hot cardboard burn his fingers. He could have left, should have left, but my legs didn't obey me. He turned, looking at them, and at that moment Sophia looked up. Her eyes met his, and the smile disappeared from her face. She turned pale, her hand froze over the table. Ryan noticed her reaction, turned and saw Ethan too. His face tensed, but he didn't look away. "Ethan," Sophia said, her voice weak, almost a whisper. She stood up, her chair creaking on the floor. "What are you doing here?" "I'm getting coffee," he replied, his tone as cold as ice. "And you?" She swallowed, her eyes darting. We were just talking," she said, fiddling with the hem of her sleeve. "We were talking," he repeated, his lips curling into a bitter smile. Ryan stood up, his movements slow, careful. "Listen, I don't want any trouble," he said, his voice level but with tension in it. You slept with my wife," Ethan interrupted, looking into his eyes. "Don't tell me you don't want problems." Ryan paused, his face turning red. Sophia stepped forward, her hand raised as if she wanted to stop him. "Ethan, don't," she said, her voice shaking. "Not here." "Why?" he asked, turning to her. "You weren't shy when you laid with him. Why now?" "Stop it," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "I didn't want you to see this." "But I see," he said, his voice growing louder. "You sit here, laugh with him, as if nothing happened, as if you didn't destroy our family." "I didn't destroy it," she snapped, her voice becoming firmer. "You kicked me out. You didn't give me a chance." "A chance?" he barked, and several heads in the cafe turned to look at them. "You slept with him. You chose him. What chance are you waiting for after this?" Ryan stepped closer, his hand resting on Sophia's shoulder. "Calm down," he said, looking at Ethan. "You're scaring her." "Take your hand away," Ethan said, his voice low and menacing. "You have no right to touch her." "I have," Ryan said, his tone sharper. "She's with me. You kicked her out." Ethan squeezed the glass so hard that the cardboard crumpled and the coffee spilled onto his hand. A burning pain ran through his skin, but he didn't let go. "Do you think this is your victory?" he asked, looking at Ryan. "Do you think she's yours now?" "I'm not a thing," Sophia said, her voice breaking. "Stop it, Ethan. Go away." He looked at her, her tears, her trembling lips, her hand still closed to Ryan. She was beautiful, even now, and that made everything worse. He remembered how he looked at her in this cafe 17 years ago, how she smiled while serving him coffee. Now she was sitting with someone else, and he couldn't stand it. "Are you happy?" he asked, his voice quiet but sharp. "With him, after everything?" She fell silent, her eyes lowered. "I don't know," she said finally. "I'm just trying to live." "Good luck to you," he said, turning towards the door. "Ethan," she called, but he was already walking towards the exit. The bell rang and the cold air hit my face. He threw the crumpled glass into the trash can by the door without looking back. The pickup was waiting for him, and he got behind the wheel, gripping it until his knuckles turned white. The engine started with a growl, and he pulled out of the parking lot, anger boiling in his chest. She was with Ryan, laughed with him, touched him, as if 3 days ago she wasn't crying, begging to come back, as if she hadn't destroyed their family. Ethan remembered her words on the phone, "I will fight." Was this her fight? Sitting in a cafe with your lover while their children cried at home? He hit the steering wheel and the horn broke the silence of the street. The way home was in the fog. He parked at the house, went inside, and heard silence. Mason came down, his eyes were red. "Dad," he said quietly, "Em is crying again." Ethan nodded and threw the keys on the table. "I'll figure it out," he said, walking up the stairs. He knocked on Emily's door. Open it." "Go away." Her voice was weak, but he pushed the door. She sat on the bed, her face wet with tears. "I saw Mom," he said, sitting down next to her. "With Ryan, in a cafe." Emily looked up, her eyes widening. "With him?" she whispered. "Is she with him?" "Yes," he said, his voice firm. "She chose him, not us." Emily began to sob, burying her face in her pillow. Ethan sat next to him, feeling his anger give way to pain. He accepted it. But now his daughter had to too. Ethan stood at the stove, stirring the sauce in the pan. The smell of garlic and tomatoes filled the kitchen, mingling with the warmth of the oven where the chicken was baking. It was Sunday evening after meeting Sophia and Ryan at the cafe. Her laughter with him, her hand almost touching him, still burned him like a hot coal. He told Emily about this, and she cried again, locking herself in the room. Mason was silent, playing in his room, but his eyes were red. Ethan knew he couldn't fix their pain, but he could at least try to give them something normal. Dinner, family dinner, without her. He took out a packet of spaghetti from the cupboard, threw it into the boiling water, and looked at the table. 3 plates, 3 forks, 3 glasses. Not 4. It was strange to see the table without her place, without her mug, without her voice asking who wanted more. She slept with Ryan consciously in his apartment, and he kicked her out. But her absence left a hole he didn't know how to fill. He clenched his jaw, pushing away thoughts of the cafe, and concentrated on cooking. The kids deserved it. They deserved at least one evening without tears. Mace," he shouted, turning off the stove. "Dinner is ready." Footsteps were heard upstairs. Mason was the first to come down, his blonde hair disheveled and his Avengers t-shirt crumpled. He looked tired, but his eyes lit up when he saw the food. "Spaghetti?" he asked, sitting down at the table. "Yes," Ethan said, placing the plate in front of him. "Your favorites." Mason nodded, picking up his fork. "Mom always made them with cheese," he said quietly, looking at the plate. Ethan froze, his hand holding the pan trembled. "I might add," he said, turning to the refrigerator. He took out the grated Parmesan cheese, sprinkled it on the Mason spaghetti, and smiled. "Is that better?" "Yes," Mason said, his lips twitching slightly into a smile. It was the first semblance of joy Ethan had seen from him in 3 days. Emily came down a minute later, her dark hair pulled back into a messy ponytail and her eyes still puffy from crying. She silently sat down opposite Mason, looking at the table. Ethan placed the plate in front of her, but she didn't look up. "Eat," he said softly. "You need it." "I'm not hungry," she muttered, crossing her arms. "Try it," he said, sitting down between them. "I tried." She looked at him, her eyes full of anger and pain. "You saw her with him," she said quietly. In the cafe, you said she was happy. Ethan clutched his fork, her words cutting like a knife. She looked like this, he said, trying to keep his voice level. But that doesn't mean she doesn't love you. She chose him, Emily said, her voice shaking. And you kicked her out. And now we're here, pretending that everything is fine. We're not pretending, Ethan said, looking at her. We can handle it. Together. Emily snorted, but picked up her fork and began picking at her food. Mason twirled the spaghetti, his movements were slow, but he ate. Ethan looked at them, feeling the heaviness in his chest ease a little. It was not a perfect dinner, not like before, when Sophia joked and the children laughed. But it was something. Their first, without her. How was school, Mace? He asked, trying to break the silence. Okay, Mason said without looking up. We drew dinosaurs. I made a T. Rex. Cool, Ethan said, smiling. Will you show me later? Yes, Mason nodded, and his voice became a little livelier. Only it didn't quite work out. The tail is crooked. Tails are always tricky, Ethan said. I was once building a bridge, and the support came out crooked. I had to redo it. Mason chuckled, the first sound of joy of the evening. Emily looked at her brother, then at her father, and her lips trembled slightly. You're a terrible builder, she said, but there was no anger in her voice. I'm an engineer, Ethan said with a mock frown. The bridges are standing, so it's not so terrible. She rolled her eyes, but took more spaghetti. Ethan looked at her, feeling a glimmer of hope. She was eating. She spoke. It was a step. Dad, Mason said, looking at him. Did Mom call? Ethan shook his head. Not today, he said, but she promised. You can talk to her. I miss her, Mason said quietly, putting down his fork. I know, Ethan said, his voice wavering. I, too, missed you. But she made a choice, and we have to live with it. Emily dropped her fork onto her plate, her eyes filling with tears again. You're not bored, she said. You hate her. You're glad she's gone. He said, looking at her. I'm not glad I didn't make such a choice. I can't forgive. But that doesn't mean I don't feel it. Then why didn't you give her a chance? She asked, her voice breaking. You just kicked her out. Because she chose him, he said, his tone becoming firmer. She went to his apartment. This is not a mistake. This is betrayal. Emily fell silent, her tears dripping onto the table. Mason looked at them. His eyes were wide, but he did not cry. I don't want you to fight, he said quietly. We don't fight, Ethan said, placing a hand on his shoulder. We talk, and we can handle it. Together. Mason nodded, and Emily wiped her tears with her sleeve. You cook better than her, she said suddenly. Her voice was weak, but there was a hint of sarcasm in it. Ethan looked at her in surprise, then smiled. Seriously? He asked. She was always bragging about her sauce. It was too salty, Emily said, her lips twitching into a slight smile. You're normal. Mason chuckled. She was always dropping cheese, he said. One day the whole floor was covered in it. Ethan laughed for the first time in days. It was a short, raspy sound, but it broke the ice in the room. I remember, he said. I was cleaning, and she was laughing. They fell silent, but the silence was different, not heavy, but warm. They ate, and Ethan looked at them, feeling something inside him letting go. It wasn't a perfect evening, but it was their evening, without her. After dinner, he cleared the plates, and the children helped Mason wipe the table. Emily put the leftovers in the refrigerator. Can I watch a movie? Mason asked, looking at his father. Yes, said Ethan. Choose. I'll join. They sat down in the living room and turned on an old cartoon about dinosaurs, Mason's favorite. Emily sat next to him, not objecting, although she usually called him childish. Ethan looked at the screen, but his thoughts were with them. They laughed, Yuzo, not like before, but they laughed. It was the first warmth in days of pain. When the movie ended, Mason fell asleep on the couch, his head falling on Ethan's shoulder. Emily stood up, looking at her brother. "He misses her," she said quietly. "You too," Ethan said, looking at her. "Yes," she admitted, her voice weak. "But I hate her for it." "We can handle it." She nodded, went upstairs, and Ethan carried Mason to his room. He lay down on his bed, looking at the ceiling. Dinner without her was a step. Small but important. He didn't know what would happen tomorrow: Sophia's call, the trial, her struggle. But today they were together, and that was enough. Ethan stood at the living room window, looking at the backyard, where the old oak trees swayed in the light breeze. It was Saturday morning, almost a year and 3 months since the day he kicked Sophia out of the house. The sun was rising above the horizon, painting the grass in golden tones, and he felt strangely calm. The divorce was completed. Despite all her threats, trials, and tears, he won. The house remained his, the children chose it, and now they were building a new life step by step, day by day. It all started with that letter, a thick envelope from her lawyer, where she challenged the prenuptial agreement, demanded joint custody and half of everything he had. She claimed that she had an emotional and financial investment in their marriage, that the house on the hill was hers as much as it was his. Ethan remembered how anger boiled inside him when he read these words. She cheated and still wanted to take his children and house away from him. But he didn't give up. Nathan Parker, his friend and lawyer, became his shield. They collected evidence. A prenuptial agreement signed 15 years ago clearly showed that the house was his before the wedding, and the renovations were completed before Sophia moved in. Their finances were separate: his pension, his account, her salary. Her contribution turned out to be empty words, and the judge saw it. The betrayal was the decisive blow. Sophia tried to deny the scale. It was a one-time thing, she said, but Ethan relayed her own confession through Nathan. The judge didn't buy her tears. The most important thing happened when the court called the children. Emily, with her dark eyes and firm voice, said, "I want to stay with Dad." She left us for him. Mason, squeezing Ethan's hand, whispered, "I don't want to live with my mother." She left. Their words were like a knife for Sophia. She sobbed in the courtroom, but the judge took into account their wishes. Ethan received full custody. Sophia received visitation rights on weekends if the children agreed. They rarely agreed. The divorce was finalized in December 2025. Sophia received only her salary and car, no child support, no house. Ethan saved everything he had built, but the victory was not pleasing. The last time he saw her was in court. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a tight bun. Her eyes were red, but she did not look at him. Ryan was waiting for her at the exit, and Ethan turned away. She made a choice. Now he was making his own. The first months after she left were chaotic. Ethan felt crushed. He signed the children up to see a psychologist. Miss Landon, the school counselor, recommended Dr. Claire Haley, a soft-spoken woman with a sharp mind. Ethan drove them once a week. Emily resisted at first, but after a month she started talking about anger, about her mother, about Disneyland, which Sophia promised but did not give. "She lied to us," she said one day, and the tears broke out. Mason was quieter, but drew dinosaurs and talked about how he missed his mother, but was afraid of her new friend. Dr. Haley helped them release it, and Ethan watched as their wounds slowly healed. He himself went to see her a couple of months later. "You suffer too," she said at the first session, and he did not argue. "I thought it was forever," he said, his voice shaking. Claire listened without interrupting and helped him understand that it was not his fault. "She made a choice," she said. "You did yours for the sake of the children." These words became his anchor. By summer they had found a rhythm. Emily was still angry, but her anger became quieter. She started drawing and joined an art club. Mason perked up. His dinosaurs decorated the walls of his house, and he laughed more often. Ethan returned to work, but cut back on overtime to be with them. They ate dinner together almost every night: spaghetti, pizza, sometimes chicken and potatoes. Without her, and it was theirs. The idea for Disneyland came in May. Emily mentioned him again, not with bitterness, but with longing. "Mom promised," she said quietly. Ethan looked at her, then at Mason, and said, We'll go on our own. They stared at him, and then Mason smiled. Is it true? He asked. True, Ethan replied. He took a week off work in June, picked up his kids from school on the last day, and put them in a pickup truck. The journey took 2 days. They stayed in motels, ate burgers, and listened to music. Emily chose a playlist. Mason slept in the back seat. When they entered the gates of Disneyland, their eyes lit up. This is better than I thought, Mason said, looking at Cinderella's castle. They spent 5 days there. They went on rides. Emily screamed on Thunder Mountain. Mason dragged them to Dinosaur World. Ethan laughed as they splashed him with water on the way down the slide and took pictures of them with Mickey Mouse. They ate ice cream, watched the parade, and on the last evening stood outside the castle watching the fireworks. Emily snuggled close to him, her voice quiet. Thanks, Dad. Mason hugged him from the other side, and Ethan felt tears burning his eyes. This was their moment, without her. After the divorce, they built a new life. Ethan sold the Porsche, he no longer needed it, and bought a boat. They went to the lake on weekends, learned to fish and swim. Emily painted sunsets, Mason caught frogs. At home, he fixed the motorcycle, and they rode around the block, laughing as the wind hit their faces. He signed up for a photography course, remembering his dream from the army, and photographed them, their smiles, their lives. Sophia called sometimes. The children talked to her, but did not want to meet her. She's with him, Emily said one day, and Mason nodded. Ethan didn't force it. She lived in an apartment in the city with Ryan, according to rumors. He didn't ask. She made her choice, and he made his. Dad, Mason shouted from the kitchen. Em says he'll make pancakes. Ethan smiled, turned, and went inside. Emily stood at the stove, her hair in a ponytail and her face focused. Don't burn the house down, he said, and she rolled her eyes. I cook better than you, she replied, and Mason laughed. Show me, Ethan said, sitting down at the table. They ate pancakes with syrup, joked, and the house was filled with warmth. This was their new road without her, but together, and she was beautiful. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.